Blood of the last alpha. Isolde Vex had always been able to hear the hounds baying in the wind. No one else could. The villagers called it a curse, an omen of death. She told herself it was only her imagination until the night she woke to the scent of smoke and pine, the sound of hooves pounding against the earth. A figure emerged from the mist, cloaked in black, his golden eyes burning like embers. "You've been running for years," he said, his voice a quiet promise. "But tonight, the hunt rides for you." Chapter 1. The Baying of the Hounds. The wind howled a mournful dirge through the skeletal branches of the ancient oaks surrounding Isolde Vex's cottage. It was a sound she knew intimately, a sound that had haunted her dreams and waking hours for as long as she could remember. Not just the wind, but within it, a chorus of spectral hounds, their baying a chilling symphony that only she could hear. The villagers of Oakhaven called it the widow's wail, a curse, they whispered, clinging to their protective charms of rowan and iron. Isolde, at 57, had long since stopped caring what they whispered. She had outlived their superstitions, their pity, and their husbands. She wrapped her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, the ruff a small comfort against the encroaching chill. The fire in the hearth had dwindled to embers, mirroring the fading warmth of the autumn sun. Isolde added another log, watching the flames tentatively lick at the dry wood, a spark of defiance against the encroaching darkness. Defiance was all she had left, really. A stubborn refusal to succumb to the loneliness, the fear, the ever-present knowing that something was coming for her. The baying intensified, a crescendo that vibrated in her very bones. It wasn't just the wind tonight. It was closer, more insistent, laced with a primal urgency that sent shivers down her spine. Isolde closed her eyes, trying to conjure the image of her late husband, Thomas. His gentle smile, the warmth of his hand in hers, the scent of his pipe tobacco a shield against the encroaching dread. But even Thomas's memory was fading, worn thin by the relentless passage of time and the constant, chilling presence of the unseen hounds. She rose, her joints protesting with a familiar ache, and moved to the window. The moon, a silver sickle in the inky sky, cast long, dancing shadows across the overgrown garden. The wind whipped her silver-streaked, dark brown hair around her face, obscuring her vision. For a moment, she thought she saw movement in the shadows, a fleeting glimpse of something dark and swift, but then it was gone. Imagination, she told herself, the same way she'd been telling herself for years. Isolde had always been different. Even as a child, she'd felt a pull towards the wild, untamed places, the deep woods, the windswept moors, the places where the veil between worlds felt thin. She'd seen things others couldn't, heard things others dismissed as fancy. And she'd always heard the hounds. Her mother, a woman steeped in the old ways, had warned her. "The wild hunt claims what it desires, Isolde," she'd said, her voice grave. "Keep your heart guarded, your spirit strong." Her mother was gone now, too, taken by a fever that swept through Oakhaven 20 years ago, leaving Isolde utterly alone. Except, of course, for the hounds. Tonight, the feeling of impending doom was almost unbearable. It pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating, like the weight of the coming winter. She poured herself a cup of chamomile tea, her hands trembling slightly. The familiar ritual, the scent of the herbs, usually calmed her, but tonight, it did little to soothe the growing unease. She sat by the window, sipping her tea, watching the shadows dance. The wind continued its relentless howl, and the baying of the hounds grew louder, closer, until it seemed to be coming from just beyond her doorstep. A knot of fear tightened in her chest. She had lived with this fear for so long, it had become a part of her, woven into the very fabric of her being. But tonight it felt different. Tonight it felt real. A sudden gust of wind slammed against the cottage, rattling the windows in their frames. The fire in the hearth flared briefly, illuminating the room with a flickering, orange glow. And then, in the sudden silence that followed, Isolde heard it. Not the baying of the hounds, but a different sound, a low, guttural growl, coming from just outside her door. a growl that was undeniably, terrifyingly real. The cup slipped from her trembling fingers, shattering on the stone floor. The chamomile tea spread like a dark stain, mirroring the spreading dread that consumed her. She backed away from the door, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The growl came again, followed by a scratching sound, as if something large and powerful were testing the strength of the old oak door. Isolde knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her years of running were over. The wild hunt had finally come for her. Chapter 2. Whispers of the Wild Hunt. The scratching ceased. A silence descended, thicker and more unnerving than the howling wind and phantom hounds. Isolde held her breath, every muscle coiled tight, her gaze fixed on the heavy oak door. It was old, reinforced with iron bands, but she knew, with a sickening certainty, that it wouldn't hold against whatever lurked on the other side. Not for long. Then a voice. Low, resonant, and strangely melodic, it cut through the silence like a shard of obsidian. Isolde Vex. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a pronouncement, imbued with an ancient power that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Her throat was constricted. Her tongue felt like lead. The voice spoke again, closer now, as if the speaker were pressed against the other side of the door. We know you hear us. We know you've always heard us. Tears welled in Isolde's eyes, tears of fear and a strange, unexpected sense of relief. The years of denial, of pretending, of trying to convince herself she was just imagining things, crumbled away like dust. They knew, and they had come. Open the door, Isolde. The command was gentle, almost persuasive, but it held an undercurrent of steel, a promise of consequences, should she refuse. She thought of running, of trying to escape through the back window, but she knew it was futile. Where could she run? They had been hunting her, in their own way, her entire life. Her hand, trembling, reached for the heavy iron bolt that secured the door. It was cold beneath her touch, radiating the chill of the night, and something else. Something ancient and untamed. As she slid the bolt back, a faint, ethereal glow seeped through the cracks around the doorframe, a pale, silvery light that pulsed with a life of its own. Isolde hesitated, her hand hovering over the latch. This was it. The moment she had dreaded, yet secretly anticipated, her entire life. The moment of truth. The moment she would face the reality of the wild hunt, the reality of her own, strange existence. She took a deep breath, the scent of pine and wood smoke suddenly filling her nostrils, sharp and invigorating. And then, with a resolve born of desperation and a strange, flickering hope, she pulled open the door. The wind rushed in, extinguishing the few remaining embers in the hearth and plunging the cottage into near darkness. Standing on her doorstep, bathed in the ethereal moonlight, was a figure that seemed to have stepped straight out of a legend. He was tall, impossibly tall, his form cloaked in shadows that seemed to writhe and shift with a life of their own. His face was partially obscured by a dark hood, but she could see the gleam of his eyes, a piercing, golden amber that burned with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. They were the eyes of a predator, yet they held a strange, unsettling beauty. Around him, barely visible in the swirling mist, were the hounds. Not the spectral hounds she had heard in the wind, but real, flesh and blood creatures, their eyes glowing with the same eerie, golden light as their masters. They were huge, their coats the color of midnight, their fangs bared in silent snarls. The man, the hunter, stepped forward, his presence filling the small cottage, overwhelming her senses. The scent of pine and wood smoke intensified, mingled with a darker, more primal scent, the scent of the wild, untamed forest, of earth and blood and ancient magic. Isolde Vex, he said again, his voice a low rumble that resonated deep within her chest. We have come for you. He extended a hand towards her, a hand gloved in dark leather, the fingers long and elegant, yet undeniably strong. It was an invitation and a command. Isolde stared at his outstretched hand, her mind reeling. This was not the monstrous, terrifying figure she had always imagined. He was beautiful, in a terrifying, otherworldly way. And his eyes, those burning, golden eyes, held a depth of emotion that she couldn't quite decipher. Sadness? Longing? Something else, something she couldn't name. She looked at his hand, then back at his face, hidden in the shadows of his hood. The hounds shifted restlessly around him, their low growls a constant reminder of their power, of his power. But it wasn't fear that held her captive now. It was something else. Something inexplicable. A single question, whispered on a breath, escaped her lips.
Why?
The hunter stilled, and slowly, with a grace belying the barely contained power, tilted his head. A whisper of movement, something that did very little to hint at what he was truly thinking. Chapter 3. The scent of smoke and pine. The hunter's head tilted, a subtle movement that somehow amplified the silence in the cottage. The only sound was the crackling of the dying embers, a faint echo of the life that was rapidly fading from Isolde's familiar world. His golden eyes, fixed on hers, seemed to pierce through her defenses, seeing not just the fear, but the years of loneliness, the hidden strength, the lingering embers of a spirit that refused to be extinguished.
Why?
He repeated, his voice a low murmur, laced with a hint of something that sounded almost like amusement. Or perhaps it was pity. Isolde couldn't be sure. Because you are ours, Isolde. You have always been ours. His words struck her like a physical blow.
Ours.
The possessive pronoun, spoken with such quiet certainty, sent a shiver down her spine. It was a claim, an assertion of ownership that defied logic, yet resonated with a truth she couldn't deny. I don't understand, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I'm just an old woman. A widow. I'm nothing. The hunter took a step closer, the scent of smoke and pine intensifying, filling her senses, making her head swim. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, a warmth that was both alluring and terrifying. He reached out and gently cupped her chin with his gloved hand, his touch surprisingly gentle. You are far more than you believe, Isolde, he said, his voice softening, losing some of its edge. You are connected to the wild hunt, to the ancient magic that flows through these lands. You are a part of us, whether you know it or not. He tilted her head up, forcing her to meet his gaze. His eyes, no longer hidden by the shadows of his hood, were even more captivating up close. They held a depth of ancient knowledge, of sorrow and power, that both frightened and fascinated her. She saw a flicker of something else in their depths, a loneliness that mirrored her own. The baying of the hounds, he continued, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. You've heard it all your life. It's the call of your blood, Isolde. The call of your ancestors. The call of me. His last word, spoken so softly, yet with such weight, sent a jolt of something akin to electricity through her. It was a claim, a promise, a threat, all rolled into one. Isolde pulled away from his touch, a surge of defiance rising within her. I don't belong to anyone, she said, her voice trembling but firm. I am my own woman. A ghost of a smile played on the hunter's lips. Are you? He asked, his voice laced with a knowing that both challenged and intrigued her. Then why do you hear the hounds? Why do you feel the pull of the wild? Why does your heart race when I touch you? His words, so close to the truth, struck her dumb. She did feel the pull of the wild, had always felt it, and her heart was racing, not just from fear, but from something else, something she didn't want to acknowledge. An attraction, a recognition, a sense of belonging? The hunter watched her, his gaze unwavering, his expression unreadable. He seemed to be waiting for something, for her to understand, to accept, to surrender. The hounds, sensing the shift in his mood, grew restless. They paced around him, their low growls a constant reminder of the power that stood before her, the power that claimed her as its own. Isolde looked at the hunter, at the hounds, at the darkness that surrounded them, and then back at her cottage, at the shattered remnants of her old life. She knew she had a choice to make. A choice that would determine not just her future, but her very existence. She could fight, she could resist, but she knew, deep down, that it was futile. He was right. She did belong with them. In some way, she didn't yet understand. The wild hunt had called to her all her life, and now, it had come to collect its due. With a sigh of resignation, and a flicker of something that might have been anticipation, Isolde met the hunter's gaze. "What do you want from me?" The hunter gave a slow, genuine smile. It changed his whole being, transforming the severity into something breathtaking. "Only what is already mine," he breathed. Chapter 4. A bargain struck in moonlight. "Only what is already mine," he repeated, the words hanging in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Isolde felt a tremor run through her, a mixture of fear and a strange, unsettling excitement. The hunter's smile, that brief glimpse of warmth, had vanished, replaced by an expression of intense focus, of ancient purpose. He stepped back, creating a space between them, a space filled with the swirling mist and the watchful presence of the hounds. "You are the last of the Vex line, Isolde. A bloodline bound to the wild hunt for centuries. A bloodline that has always provided a bride to the hunt's leader."
Bride.
The word echoed in Isolde's mind, conjuring images of white dresses and flower-strewn altars, images that clashed violently with the reality of the cloaked figure and his pack of otherworldly hounds. This was no ordinary marriage proposal. This was something far older, far more primal. "A bride?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm an old woman. I'm past childbearing age. What use could I possibly be to the wild hunt?" The hunter's gaze softened slightly, a flicker of something that might have been compassion in his golden eyes. "It is not about children, Isolde. It is about the bond, the magic, the power that flows through your bloodline. A power that strengthens the hunt, that protects it from its enemies." He gestured towards the hounds, their eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "The hunt is weakened, Isolde. The veil between worlds is thinning, and our enemies grow stronger. We need your power, your connection to the earth, to the ancient magic that runs through these lands." Isolde felt a surge of anger, a spark of the defiance that had kept her alive all these years. "So, I'm just a vessel? A source of power to be used and discarded?" The hunter shook his head.
No, Isolde.
"You are far more than that. You are a partner, a protector, a queen." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur. "The bond between the hunt's leader and his bride is sacred, unbreakable. It is a joining of souls, a merging of power. You will not be a prisoner, Isolde. You will be my equal." His words, spoken with such intensity, sent a shiver down her spine. The idea of being bound to this powerful, enigmatic being, of sharing his power, of becoming a queen of the wild hunt, was both terrifying and exhilarating. But doubt lingered. "And if I refuse?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The hunter's expression hardened, the warmth in his eyes replaced by a chilling coldness. "The hunt takes what it is owed, Isolde, one way or another. But I offer you a choice. A chance to embrace your destiny, to become something more than you ever imagined. Refuse, and the consequences will be dire. Not just for you, but for this village, for this land." The threat hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Isolde looked at the hounds, their eyes burning with a fierce, unwavering loyalty to their master. She knew he wasn't bluffing. The wild hunt was a force of nature, a power that could not be defied. She looked back at her cottage, at the remnants of her old life. A life of loneliness, of fear, of always waiting for the inevitable. And then she looked at the hunter, at the promise of power, of belonging, of a life beyond her wildest dreams. A bargain. A terrifying, exhilarating bargain. A choice between a lonely death and a life bound to the wild hunt. After a long, agonizing silence, Isolde met the hunter's gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and a strange, undeniable sense of fate. "What must I do?" she asked. The hunter's smile this time was knowing. "Take my hand, Isolde, and you will find the answers within the beat of my very heart." Chapter 5. Echoes of a Forgotten Past. His words were an echo of something she'd felt, deep in the marrow of her bones, for her entire life. A pull, an understanding, a sense of rightness that warred fiercely with the fear. Isolde looked at his outstretched hand, the leather glove gleaming faintly in the moonlight. It was a hand that promised power, danger, and a life utterly unlike anything she had ever known. A hand that offered an escape from the loneliness that had been her constant companion for so long. Hesitantly, she reached out, her own hand trembling, the skin wrinkled and weathered with age. As her fingertips brushed against his, a jolt of energy surged through her, a wave of heat and power that made her gasp. It was like touching a live wire, a conduit to something ancient and untamed. The hunter's grip tightened around hers, his hand strong and surprisingly warm. He pulled her gently towards him, out of the cottage and into the swirling mist. The hounds, their eyes glowing with that eerie golden light, formed a protective circle around them, their presence both menacing and reassuring. As they walked, the mist thickened, obscuring the familiar landscape, wrapping them in a cocoon of silence and shadow. The only sound was the rhythmic beat of her own heart and the soft padding of the hound's paws on the damp earth. "Where are we going?" Isolde asked, her voice barely a whisper. "To the heart of the wildwood," the hunter replied, his voice a low rumble beside her ear. "To the place where the veil between worlds is thinnest. To the place where you will become one with the hunt." His words sent a shiver down her spine. One with the hunt. What did that even mean? Would she lose herself, her identity, her memories? Would she become just another mindless creature, bound to his will? As if sensing her fear, the hunter squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Do not be afraid, Isolde," he said, his voice softening. "I will not let you be harmed. I will protect you. Always." His words, spoken with such conviction, eased her fear slightly. But she still couldn't shake the feeling of unease, the sense that she was stepping into a world she didn't understand, a world that could consume her whole. As they walked deeper into the woods, the trees grew taller, their branches intertwining overhead, blocking out the moonlight and plunging them into near darkness. The air grew heavy with a scent of pine and damp earth and a strange, almost palpable energy. Isolde began to see things, fleeting glimpses of movement in the shadows, whispers of voices carried on the wind. She saw faces in the gnarled bark of the trees, heard the rustling of unseen wings, felt the brush of something cold and ethereal against her skin. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice trembling. "This is where the veil is thin, Isolde," the hunter replied. "Where the mortal world and the otherworld touch. Where the spirits of the dead roam free and the ancient magic still holds sway." He stopped walking, turning to face her. His golden eyes, glowing in the darkness, held a depth of emotion that she couldn't quite decipher. Sadness? Longing? And something else, a hint of vulnerability. "Your ancestors walked these paths, Isolde," he said, his voice soft. "They made the same bargain you have made. They gave themselves to the hunt, and in return, they received power, protection, and a life beyond the confines of mortality." He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the lines of her face. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked. "The echoes of their lives, their memories, their love."
And she did.
She felt a strange sense of familiarity, a connection to this place, to these woods, to the hunter himself. It was as if she were remembering something she had long forgotten, a part of herself that had been buried deep within her subconscious. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of recognition, of acceptance, of a grief long suppressed. She was not just Isolde Vex, the lonely widow of Oakhaven. She was something more, something ancient and powerful, something connected to the wild hunt, to the magic that flowed through these lands. I remember," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. The hunter smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face and made him seem almost human. "Then you are ready," he said. And tilting his head, he beckoned her forward.
"Come."
The ritual awaits. Chapter 6. The Mark of the Hunt. "Come," he repeated, his voice a silken whisper that seemed to weave itself into the very fabric of the night. The mist swirled around them, thicker now, imbued with a luminescence that painted the ancient trees in shades of silver and shadow. Isolde, her hand still clasped firmly in the hunter's, felt a pull, a magnetic force drawing her deeper into the heart of the wildwood. The hounds, silent sentinels, flanked them, their golden eyes reflecting the ethereal light. They moved with a fluid grace, their paws making no sound on the moss-covered ground. Isolde could feel their presence, a comforting weight, a reassurance that she was not alone in this strange, otherworldly journey. The hunter led her to a clearing, a circular space bathed in the silvery glow of the moon, which had somehow pierced through the dense canopy overhead. In the center of the clearing stood a massive, ancient oak, its branches reaching towards the sky like gnarled, skeletal fingers. Around the base of the oak, a circle of stones had been arranged, each one etched with strange, runic symbols that seemed to shimmer and shift in the moonlight. "This is the sacred place," the hunter said, his voice hushed with reverence. "The place where the bond will be forged. The place where you will receive the mark of the hunt. The mark of the hunt." The words sent a shiver of anticipation and fear through Isolde. She had no idea what to expect, what form this mark would take. Would it be painful? Would it change her, physically, irrevocably? The hunter released her hand, stepping into the circle of stones. He turned to face her, his golden eyes burning with an intensity that made her heart pound. "You must step into the circle, Isolde," he said. "You must offer yourself willingly to the hunt. You must open your heart and your soul to the ancient magic." His words were both a command and an invitation, a challenge and a promise. Isolde hesitated, her mind racing. This was it, the point of no return, the moment she would commit herself, body and soul, to the wild hunt. She looked at the hunter, at his powerful form silhouetted against the moonlight, at the ancient oak, at the circle of stones, at the hounds watching her with their unwavering gaze. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this was her destiny. This was where she belonged. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the circle. As she did, a wave of energy washed over her, a tingling sensation that spread through her entire body, from the tips of her toes to the roots of her hair. The air crackled with power, the runic symbols on the stones glowed brighter, and the mist swirled around her, forming a vortex of light and shadow. The hunter began to chant, his voice low and resonant, the words ancient and unfamiliar, yet somehow she understood them. It was a language of power, a language of magic, a language of the soul. As he chanted, he raised his hands towards the sky, and a beam of moonlight descended, bathing him in a silvery glow. He then lowered his hands, directing the light towards Isolde. The light enveloped her, warm and comforting, yet also intense, almost overwhelming. She felt a tingling sensation on her left shoulder, a burning, searing pain that made her gasp. But the pain was quickly followed by a feeling of release, of liberation, of something ancient and powerful awakening within her. The hunter stopped chanting, his eyes fixed on her shoulder. He stepped closer, his gaze intense. He reached out and gently touched the spot where she had felt the burning sensation. "The mark," he said, his voice soft. "It is done." Isolde looked down at her shoulder. There, etched into her skin, was a symbol, a stylized image of a running hound, its form sleek and powerful, its eyes glowing with a faint, golden light. It was beautiful and terrifying. It was a mark of ownership, of belonging, of a bond that could never be broken. She looked up at the hunter, her eyes filled with a mixture of awe and trepidation. What happens now?" He smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a shiver of excitement through her. "Now," he said, his voice a low whisper, "you are truly one of us." He lowered his face, capturing her gaze. "Now," he said again, his voice barely audible, "you are mine." Chapter 7. Shadows of the Unseelie Court. "Mine," he breathed, the word a possessive whisper that echoed through the clearing, resonating with the ancient power of the wild hunt. Isolde felt a tremor run through her, a complex blend of fear, excitement, and a strange, unsettling sense of belonging. The mark of the hunt, still tingling on her shoulder, felt like a brand, a permanent reminder of the bargain she had struck, the life she had chosen. The hunter, she still didn't know his name, straightened, his golden eyes holding hers captive. "But the joining is not yet complete, Isolde," he said, his voice regaining its low, resonant tone. "There is another who must acknowledge the bond. Another who disputes our claim." His words sent a chill down her spine. Another? Who could possibly challenge the wild hunt, a force of nature, an embodiment of ancient magic? As if in answer to her unspoken question, the air around them grew cold, the temperature dropping dramatically. The mist thickened, swirling with an unnatural speed, and the cheerful moonlight was replaced by an oppressive darkness. The hounds, previously calm, began to growl, their hackles raised, their golden eyes fixed on a point just beyond the circle of stones. A figure emerged from the shadows, slowly, deliberately, as if savoring the fear it inspired. It was a woman, tall and slender, with skin as pale as moonlight and hair as black as a raven's wing. Her eyes, a chilling shade of ice blue, burned with an intensity that made Isolde's breath catch in her throat. She was dressed in a gown of shimmering black silk, adorned with intricate patterns of thorns and twisted vines. The woman's gaze swept over Isolde, cold and dismissive, before settling on the hunter. "A mortal bride, Phelan?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You have truly fallen low. Phelan. So that was his name." It suited him, Isolde thought, a name that sounded both wild and noble, ancient and powerful. Phelan stepped forward, placing himself between Isolde and the woman. "She is of the Vex bloodline, Lyra," he said, his voice hard, edged with steel. "She has the right." "Lyra," the woman laughed, a cold, brittle sound that sent shivers down Isolde's spine. "The Vex bloodline is weak, deluded. She is nothing but a frail, aging mortal. She is unworthy of the wild hunt." Isolde felt a surge of anger at the woman's words. She might be old, she might be mortal, but she was not weak. She had survived a lifetime of loneliness and fear, and she had faced the wild hunt itself. "She has accepted the bond," Phelan said, his voice unwavering. "She bears the mark. The ancient laws are clear." Lyra's eyes narrowed, her gaze flickering to Isolde's shoulder, where the mark of the hunt glowed faintly. "The ancient laws can be reinterpreted," she said, her voice laced with a veiled threat. "The Unseelie Court does not recognize this union." The Unseelie Court. The words sent a wave of fear through Isolde. She had heard whispers of the Unseelie Court, of its dark magic, its cruelty, its endless hunger for power. They were the enemies of a wild hunt, the forces of chaos and darkness that sought to destroy the balance of the world. "The Unseelie Court has no say in this matter," Phelan said, his voice dangerously low. "This is between Isolde and me, between the hunt and its bride." Lyra smiled, a cruel, predatory smile that revealed sharp, pointed teeth. "We shall see, Phelan," she said. "We shall see." And with that, she vanished back into the shadows, leaving behind an icy chill and a lingering sense of dread. Phelan turned to Isolde, his expression grim. "She will not give up easily," he said. "Lyra desires the power of the hunt for herself. She will do anything to prevent this bond from being fully realized." He took Isolde's hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "But I will protect you, Isolde," he said, his voice softening. "I swear it. The hunt will protect you." Isolde looked into his golden eyes, and for the first time since she had opened her door to him, she felt a flicker of trust. A belief that he would keep his word, that he would protect her from the shadows that threatened to consume them both. The danger was real and palpable now. But so was the bond she was forming with this captivating, mysterious being. Chapter 8. The Heart of the Wildwood. Phelan's grip on her hand was a lifeline in the swirling darkness that followed Lyra's departure. The chill she'd left behind lingered, a palpable reminder of the threat that now hung over them, a shadow cast over their fragile, newly formed bond. "We must leave this place," Phelan said, his voice urgent, his golden eyes scanning the surrounding woods. "Lyra will not attack here, not on sacred ground, but she will be watching, waiting." He led her away from the clearing, deeper into the wildwood, the hounds flanking them, their silent presence a comforting reassurance. The trees grew taller, their branches intertwining overhead, creating a dense canopy that blotted out the moon and stars, plunging them into an almost impenetrable darkness. But Phelan seemed to know the way, navigating the treacherous paths with an effortless grace, as if he were a part of the forest itself. Isolde, her senses heightened by the magic that now coursed through her veins, began to perceive the wildwood in a new way. It was no longer just a collection of trees and shadows, but a living, breathing entity, pulsating with a hidden energy, a network of ancient pathways and secret places. She could hear the whispers of the wind through the leaves, the rustling of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, the faint, ethereal music that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the forest. She could smell the damp earth, the scent of pine and moss, and 100 other subtle fragrances that she had never noticed before. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, not wanting to break the spell of the enchanted forest. "To my home," Phelan replied, his voice a low rumble beside her ear. "To a place where you will be safe."
For now.
His home. The thought sent a flutter of anticipation through her. What would it be like? A hidden cave? A towering castle? A cottage woven from living trees? After what seemed like hours, they emerged into a clearing, bathed in the soft glow of an unseen light source. In the center of the clearing stood a dwelling, but it was unlike anything Isolde had ever imagined. It was a tree, a massive, ancient oak, even larger than the one in the sacred clearing. But this tree was alive, in a way that defied description. Its branches, thick and gnarled, were interwoven to form walls and a roof, creating a structure that was both organic and architectural. The leaves, a vibrant shade of emerald green, shimmered with an inner light, illuminating the clearing with a soft, ethereal glow. The trunk of the tree was hollow, and a doorway, arched and inviting, had been carved into its base. "Welcome to my home, Isolde," Phelan said, his voice filled with a quiet pride. "Welcome to the heart of the wildwood." He led her towards the doorway, and as they stepped inside, Isolde gasped. The interior of the tree was even more breathtaking than the exterior. The walls were lined with smooth, warm wood, carved with intricate patterns of leaves and vines. The floor was covered in a soft, mossy carpet, and the air was filled with the scent of pine and wildflowers. The space was surprisingly large, divided into several chambers, each one lit by glowing orbs that floated in the air, casting a warm, inviting light. There was a living area, with comfortable seating made from woven branches and cushions filled with soft down. There was a kitchen, with a hearth made from smooth stones and shelves stocked with strange and wonderful ingredients. There was a bedroom, with a bed made from a giant, hollowed-out log, covered in furs and soft blankets. This is incredible," Isolde said, her voice filled with awe. Phelan smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face and made him seem almost human.
"It is my sanctuary," he said.
"A place where I can be myself, away from the eyes of the world." He led her to the living area, gesturing for her to sit. He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You are safe here, Isolde," he said, his voice reassuring. "Lyra cannot reach you here. The magic of the wildwood protects us." Isolde looked around at the beautiful, magical dwelling, at the warm, inviting light, at the peaceful, serene atmosphere. And for the first time since she had opened her door to the wild hunt, she felt a sense of peace, a sense of belonging, a sense that she had finally come home. But the image of Lyra, her chilling eyes, still intruded. She had to know. Why does she hate me so? She asked quietly, looking at Phelan. His jaw tightened. Chapter 9. A Dance with Destiny. Phelan's jaw tightened, a flicker of anger, and something else, perhaps regret, crossing his golden eyes. The warmth of the tree home, the soft light, the sense of sanctuary, seemed to momentarily recede, replaced by the chilling shadow of Lyra and her animosity. He hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully before speaking. Lyra, she was to be my bride, he said, his voice low, laced with a bitterness that surprised Isolde. Before the hunt called you. The revelation struck Isolde like a physical blow. She had known there was something more to Lyra's hatred, but she hadn't expected this. A jilted lover? A rival for Phelan's affection? The thought was both unsettling and strangely flattering.
But why?
Isolde asked, her voice trembling slightly. Why did the hunt call me if she... Phelan sighed, running a hand through his dark hair, a gesture that seemed surprisingly human, surprisingly vulnerable. The hunt chooses its bride based on the strength of the bloodline, on the connection to the ancient magic, he explained. Lyra is powerful, yes, but her power is tainted. It comes from the unseelie court, from the realm of shadows and darkness. Your bloodline, the Vex line, is pure. It is connected to the earth, to the very heart of the wildwood. He looked at her, his gaze intense, searching. The hunt needs a bride who can balance the power, who can keep the darkness at bay. Lyra would have tipped the scales, plunged the hunt, and perhaps the world, into chaos. Isolde felt a surge of pride. It was a strange feeling, considering the circumstances, but she couldn't deny the sense of validation that came with knowing she was chosen, not for her beauty or her youth, but for the strength of her spirit, the purity of her bloodline. So, she hates me because I took her place? Isolde asked, trying to understand the complex web of emotions and ancient rivalries that she had been thrust into. Phelan nodded. She sees you as a thief, an imposter, he said. She believes she is the rightful bride of the wild hunt, that she deserves the power, the status, the bond with me. He paused, his gaze dropping to their intertwined hands, his fingers tightening around hers. But the hunt made its choice, Isolde, he said, his voice firm. And I do not regret it. His words, spoken with such quiet intensity, sent a warmth spreading through her, a warmth that had nothing to do with the magical fire that warmed the tree home. It was a warmth of connection, of acceptance, of something that felt dangerously close to desire. He raised his gaze to meet hers, his golden eyes filled with a depth of emotion that she couldn't quite decipher. It was a mixture of longing, of protectiveness, and something else, something that made her heart beat faster. We must prepare, Isolde, he said, his voice regaining its urgency. Lyra will not rest until she has what she wants. We must strengthen the bond between us, learn to harness your power, prepare for the battle that is to come. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. Come, he said. Let us begin. He led her to a different chamber of the tree home, a room filled with strange and wonderful objects. There were shelves lined with ancient books, their pages filled with cryptic symbols and forgotten languages. There were tables covered with herbs and potions, their scents mingling in the air, creating a heady, intoxicating aroma. There were crystals that pulsed with light, mirrors that reflected not just images but emotions, and weapons that seemed to hum with a hidden power. This is where you will learn, Isolde, Phelan said. Where you will discover the true extent of your abilities. Where you will become the bride of the wild hunt, in every sense of the word. He picked up a silver dagger, its blade etched with intricate runes, and handed it to her. The first lesson, he said, is to learn to defend yourself. He moved behind her, his body close, his breath warm against her ear. He placed his hands over hers, guiding her movements, showing her how to hold the dagger, how to strike, how to parry. Their bodies moved in unison, a strange, intimate dance, a dance of power, of danger, of destiny. And as they danced, Isolde felt a connection to Phelan, to the wild hunt, to the ancient magic that flowed through her veins, a connection that grew stronger with every passing moment. A dangerous, exhilarating, undeniable connection that was beginning to feel like the most important thing in the world. The silver flashed between them. Chapter 10. The Price of Protection. The silver dagger felt surprisingly comfortable in Isolde's hand, an extension of her own will, a conduit for the burgeoning power she felt humming beneath her skin. Phelan's presence behind her, his body a warm, solid shield, his hands guiding hers, was both reassuring and unsettling. She could feel the heat of his breath on her neck, the subtle scent of pine and wood smoke that clung to him, the almost imperceptible tremor of his muscles as they moved in unison. "Focus, Isolde," he murmured, his voice a low rumble in her ear. "Feel the energy flowing through you, from the earth, through the mark, into the blade." She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to do as he instructed. It wasn't easy. The fear of Lyra, the strangeness of her new surroundings, the sheer intensity of Phelan's presence, all conspired to distract her. But beneath it all, she could feel a faint, pulsing energy, a connection to something ancient and powerful, something that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. She opened her eyes, focusing on the imaginary opponent before her, and struck. The movement was awkward, clumsy, but there was a spark of power behind it, a hint of the potential that lay dormant within her. Phelan adjusted her grip, his fingers brushing against hers, sending a jolt of awareness through her. "Better," he said. "But you must be quicker, more decisive. Lyra will not give you time to think." They continued to practice for hours, it seemed, the movements becoming more fluid, more natural, with each repetition. Isolde's initial awkwardness gave way to a growing confidence, a sense of empowerment that she had never experienced before. She was not just a widow, a lonely old woman. She was a warrior, a protector, a bride of the wild hunt. As the hours passed, the physical exertion began to take its toll. Isolde's muscles ached, her breath came in ragged gasps, and sweat beaded on her forehead. But she refused to give up, driven by a fierce determination to master the skills Phelan was teaching her, to prove herself worthy of the power she had been given. Finally, Phelan stepped back, allowing her to stand on her own. "Enough for tonight," he said, his voice hoarse, his own breath coming slightly faster than usual. "You have done well, Isolde. Better than I expected." His praise, though understated, sent a warmth spreading through her, a feeling of accomplishment that was far more satisfying than any physical pleasure. She looked at him, her eyes shining with a mixture of exhaustion and pride. "Thank you," she said, her voice slightly breathless, for teaching me. For believing in me." He smiled, a genuine smile that softened his features and made him seem almost vulnerable. "I believe in the hunt, Isolde," he said. "And the hunt chose you." He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. "But there is a price for this power, Isolde," he said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "A price for the protection the hunt offers." Isolde's heart sank. She had known, deep down, that there would be a catch. Nothing came for free, especially not power, especially not from the wild hunt. What price?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Phelan hesitated, as if reluctant to speak the words. "The bond between us," he said. "It must be consummated. To fully awaken your power, to seal our connection, to make you truly mine." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Consummated. The word conjured images of intimacy, of surrender, of a merging of bodies and souls that was both terrifying and alluring. Isolde felt a blush rise to her cheeks, a heat that had nothing to do with the exertion of their training. She looked away, unable to meet his gaze. She was an old woman, a widow, long past the age of such things. But she was also something more now, something reborn, something connected to this powerful, enigmatic being, something drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. "I don't know," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Phelan stepped closer, his presence filling her senses, overwhelming her with his warmth, his scent, his sheer power. He gently cupped her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "There is no rush, Isolde," he said, his voice soft, reassuring. but it must happen. Eventually. For your sake, for the hunt's sake, for the sake of the world. The very real pressure of his words, the underlying danger, seemed to push her towards some unknown precipice. Chapter 11. Unveiling the Hunter. His words, though gentle, carried the weight of inevitability. The bond must be consummated. Not for pleasure, not for love, but for duty, for power, for survival. The thought was both terrifying and strangely compelling. Isolde looked into Phelan's golden eyes, searching for answers, for reassurance, for something that would make this decision, this sacrifice, easier. He seemed to understand her unspoken plea. He released her chin, stepping back slightly, giving her space to breathe, to think. "I will not force you, Isolde," he said, his voice regaining its low, resonant tone. "But I want you to understand me, to understand the hunt, the burden I carry, the reason I am who I am." He gestured towards a large, intricately carved wooden chest that sat in a corner of the room. "There are things you should know, Isolde," he said. "Things about my past, about the history of the hunt, about the dangers we face." He walked towards the chest, opening it with a slow, deliberate movement. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were objects, artifacts, mementos, relics of a life that spanned centuries. He took out a silver ring, intricately carved with the same running hound symbol that now marked Isolde's shoulder. "This belonged to the first bride of the wild hunt," he said, his voice hushed with reverence. "A woman named Maeve. She was powerful, beautiful, courageous. She sacrificed everything for the hunt, for her people." He placed the ring in Isolde's hand. It felt heavy, cold, imbued with an ancient energy that sent a shiver down her spine. He then took out a faded tapestry, depicting a scene of a fierce battle between the wild hunt and a horde of shadowy creatures. "This is the great battle of the Shadowlands," he explained. "A battle fought centuries ago, a battle that nearly destroyed the hunt, a battle that claimed Maeve's life." Isolde looked at the tapestry, at the figures of the hunters, their faces grim, determined, their weapons raised against the encroaching darkness. She saw a figure that resembled Phelan, his eyes blazing with power, his hand wielding a sword that seemed to be made of pure light. "I was there, Isolde," Phelan said, his voice filled with a deep, abiding sorrow. "I fought beside Maeve. I failed to protect her." His words revealed a vulnerability that she hadn't seen before, a crack in his seemingly impenetrable armor. He was not just a powerful, immortal being, but a man who had experienced loss, grief, regret. He took out a small, leather-bound book, its pages filled with a spidery script that Isolde recognized as the same language used in the chanting during the marking ritual. "This is Maeve's journal," he said. "Her thoughts, her fears, her love for me." He handed the book to Isolde. She opened it carefully, her fingers tracing the faded ink, feeling a connection to this woman, this ancestor, this bride of the wild hunt who had come before her. "Read it, Isolde," Phelan said. "Learn from her. Understand what it means to be the bride of the wild hunt. Understand what it means to be mine." He turned away, leaving her alone with the artifacts, with the echoes of the past, with the weight of the decision that lay before her. Isolde sat down, the book in her lap, the ring in her hand, the tapestry spread before her. She began to read, immersing herself in Maeve's words, in her world, in her love for Phelan, in her dedication to the hunt. And as she read, she began to understand, not just the burden, but the honor, the power, the beauty of being the bride of the wild hunt. She began to understand Phelan, his sorrow, his strength, his unwavering commitment to protecting the world from the darkness. The journal entries were beautiful, poetic, filled with descriptions of this very tree, of Phelan's laugh, of the way the light of the wildwood seemed to bless them. It told a story of love, a deep, powerful love. But it also told a story of duty. Isolde knew now. The feeling in her bones, the magic in her blood, she had to choose, and soon. Chapter 12. The Threads of Fate. Hours passed, marked only by the shifting glow of the orbs that illuminated the tree home and the turning of pages in Maeve's journal. Isolde read, absorbed, lost in the world of the first bride of the Wild Hunt, a world of ancient magic, fierce battles, and a love that transcended time and death. Maeve's words painted a vivid picture of Phelan, not just as the powerful leader of the hunt, but as a man of deep compassion, unwavering loyalty, and a surprising gentleness. She wrote of his laughter, his love of the forest, his quiet moments of reflection, his fierce protectiveness of those he cared for. She wrote of their bond, not just as a duty, but as a source of strength, of joy, of a love that defied the boundaries of mortality. But she also wrote of the challenges, the dangers, the constant threat of the unseelie court, the sacrifices that had to be made. She wrote of her fear, her doubts, her moments of weakness, but also of her unwavering determination to fulfill her role, to protect the hunt, to stand by Phelan's side. As Isolde read, she felt a growing connection to Maeve, a sense of kinship, of shared destiny. She saw reflections of her own fears, her own doubts, her own burgeoning feelings for Phelan in Maeve's words. She began to understand that the bond between the hunt's leader and his bride was not just a matter of power, but of love, of trust, of a deep, abiding connection that transcended the physical realm. She closed the journal, her heart heavy with emotion. She looked at the silver ring, still clutched in her hand, and at the tapestry, depicting the great battle of the Shadowlands, the battle that had claimed Maeve's life. She understood now the weight of the responsibility, the price of the protection, the sacrifices that had to be made. She stood, her legs stiff from sitting for so long, and walked towards a chamber where Phelan had left her. She found him standing by a window, gazing out at the moonlit forest, his silhouette framed against the ethereal glow. He seemed lost in thought, his shoulders slumped, his posture radiating a weariness that belied his immortal nature. "Phelan," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. He turned, his golden eyes meeting hers. He looked tired, vulnerable, stripped of the aura of power that usually surrounded him. "Isolde," he said, his voice hoarse. "Have you?" He didn't finish the question, but she knew what he was asking. Had she made a decision? Was she ready to accept the bond, to consummate their connection, to become his bride in every sense of the word? She walked towards him, her steps slow but determined. She stopped in front of him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, to smell the familiar scent of pine and wood smoke that clung to him. She took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his, feeling the strength, the warmth, the surprising gentleness of his touch. She looked into his eyes, seeing not just the power of the hunt, but the vulnerability, the loneliness, the longing that he had tried so hard to conceal. "I understand now," she said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "I understand the burden, the responsibility, the love." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by a slow, hesitant smile.
"And?"
he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Isolde took a deep breath, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had made her decision. She had chosen her destiny. "And," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I accept. I accept the bond. I accept you." She raised herself on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his, a tentative, hesitant kiss that quickly deepened into something more, something passionate, something that spoke of centuries of waiting, of a love that was both ancient and new, of a destiny that could no longer be denied. The threads of fate, so long entwined, held them both. Chapter 13. A Glimpse of Eternity. The kiss was a spark, igniting a fire that had been smoldering beneath the surface, a fire fueled by centuries of tradition, by the pull of ancient magic, by the undeniable connection between two souls destined to be together. Phelan's arms wrapped around Isolde, pulling her close, his embrace both protective and possessive, a claiming that was both physical and spiritual. The kiss deepened, becoming more passionate, more urgent, a release of pent-up longing, of fear, of the weight of responsibility that they both carried. It was a kiss that spoke of acceptance, of surrender, of a merging of two beings into one. Isolde felt her senses reeling, overwhelmed by the intensity of Phelan's presence, by the feel of his lips on hers, by the strength of his arms around her, by the scent of pine and wood smoke that clung to him, a scent that had become inextricably linked with him, with the wild hunt, with her new life. He broke the kiss, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his golden eyes burning with a desire that mirrored her own. He looked at her, his gaze searching, questioning, as if he couldn't quite believe that this was happening, that she had truly accepted him, that she was truly his. "Isolde," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Are you sure?" She nodded, her eyes shining with tears, tears of joy, of relief, of a love that was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she said, her voice trembling slightly. He smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face and made him seem almost boyish, despite the centuries of experience etched into his features. He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, and led her towards the bedroom chamber, the room with the bed made from a giant, hollowed-out log, covered in furs and soft blankets. The room was lit by the soft, ethereal glow of the orbs that floated in the air, casting a warm, inviting light. The air was filled with the scent of wildflowers and a subtle, musky fragrance that seemed to emanate from Phelan himself. He gently pushed her towards the bed, his eyes never leaving hers. He began to unbutton her blouse, his fingers trembling slightly, revealing the mark of the hunt on her shoulder, the symbol of their bond, the symbol of her new life. As he undressed her, and she him, Isolde felt a sense of peace, of rightness, of a coming home that she had never expected to experience. She was not just an old woman, a widow, a lonely soul. She was a bride, a lover, a queen of the wild hunt. When they lay together, skin to skin, heart to heart, Isolde felt the power of the bond surge through them, a wave of energy that connected them on a level that transcended the physical. It was a merging of souls, a joining of two beings into one, a completion of a circle that had been centuries in the making. It wasn't just a physical act, but a spiritual one, a sacred ritual, a dance of ancient magic that bound them together for eternity. As they moved together, lost in the throes of passion, Isolde felt a glimpse of that eternity, a sense of timelessness, of a love that defied the boundaries of mortality, of a connection that would last forever. She felt young, powerful, and utterly, completely his as he was hers. It was as though the whole wildwood held its breath with them. Chapter 14. The Gathering Storm. The aftermath of their union was a quiet, serene interlude, a moment of peace stolen from the gathering storm. Isolde lay nestled in Phelan's arms, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, a rhythm that now echoed her own. The mark of the hunt on her shoulder, no longer tingling, felt like a warm, comforting presence, a constant reminder of the bond they had forged, the love they had shared. Phelan stroked her hair, his touch gentle, possessive, his golden eyes filled with a tenderness that melted away any lingering doubts, any lingering fears. "You are mine now, Isolde," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear.
"Truly mine."
"And I am yours." She smiled, a contented smile that reflected the peace, the joy, the sense of belonging that she had found in his arms, in the heart of the wildwood, in the embrace of the wild hunt. But their peaceful interlude was short-lived. The outside world, the threat of Lyra and the unseelie court, intruded upon their sanctuary, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lay ahead. Phelan stiffened, his body tensing, his golden eyes losing their warmth, replaced by a steely glint. "They are coming," he said, his voice grim. Isolde felt a surge of fear, but it was tempered by a newfound strength, a confidence that came from the bond she shared with Phelan, from the power that now flowed through her veins. "Who?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Lyra," Phelan replied, his voice tight with anger and a hint of fear. "She has gathered her forces. She is coming to challenge the bond, to claim you, to destroy the hunt." He sat up, pulling her with him, his movements urgent, decisive. "We must prepare," he said. "We must gather our own forces. We must fight." He dressed quickly, his movements fluid and graceful, his body radiating a power that was both terrifying and exhilarating. He helped Isolde dress, his touch no longer tender, but protective, determined. He led her out of the bedroom chamber, back into the main living area of the tree home. The atmosphere had changed. The peaceful, serene ambience had been replaced by a sense of urgency, of impending battle. The hounds, who had been sleeping peacefully by the hearth, were now awake, alert, their golden eyes glowing with a fierce intensity. They gathered around Phelan, their bodies tense, their low growls a constant reminder of their power, their loyalty. Phelan spoke to them in the ancient language of the hunt, his voice commanding, authoritative. The hounds responded, their growls turning into howls, a chorus of wild, untamed sound that echoed through the tree home, a call to arms, a declaration of war. Phelan turned to Isolde, his expression grim, but determined. "Stay here," he said. "You will be safe within the tree. The magic of the wildwood will protect you." Isolde shook her head. "No," she said, her voice firm. "I will fight beside you. I am the bride of the wild hunt. I will not hide while you face danger alone." Phelan hesitated, his eyes searching hers. He saw the determination, the courage, the love that shone in her eyes, and he knew he couldn't refuse her. He smiled, a slow, proud smile that sent a warmth spreading through her. "Then let us face them together," he said. "Let us show them the power of the wild hunt, the power of our bond, the power of our love." He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, and together, they stepped out of the tree home, into the gathering storm, ready to face whatever lay ahead, united by a love that was stronger than fear, stronger than darkness, stronger than death itself. The wind picked up. It began to rain. Chapter 15. Betrayal and Blood. The rain lashed down, a furious torrent that mirrored the tempest brewing within Isolde's heart. The wind howled through the branches of the ancient trees, a mournful dirge that seemed to presage the coming battle. Stepping out of the protective embrace of the tree home, Isolde felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather, and everything to do with the palpable sense of dread that hung heavy in the air. Phelan, his hand clasped tightly around hers, led her towards the edge of the clearing, his golden eyes scanning the surrounding woods, his body tense, alert, every muscle coiled for action. The hounds, their coats glistening with rain, flanked them, their low growls a constant, menacing undercurrent to the storm's fury. "They will come from the north," Phelan said, his voice low, barely audible above the wind and rain. "That is where the veil is thinnest, where the power of the unseelie court is strongest." He pointed towards a dense thicket of trees, their branches twisted and gnarled, their leaves a sickly, unnatural shade of black. The air around them seemed to shimmer and distort, a visible manifestation of the dark magic that emanated from the unseelie realm. As they watched, the shadows within the thicket began to coalesce, taking on shapes, forms, figures that sent a shiver of fear down Isolde's spine. They were creatures of nightmare, grotesque parodies of nature, their bodies twisted and deformed, their eyes burning with a cold, malevolent light. Goblins, trolls, dark elves, and creatures she couldn't even name, all armed with crude weapons and fueled by a hatred that was almost palpable. And at their head, riding a massive, skeletal horse, was Lyra. Her pale skin seemed to glow in the darkness, her black hair whipping around her face like a storm cloud, her ice-blue eyes fixed on Phelan with a venomous intensity. "Phelan," she called out, her voice amplified by the storm, carrying across the clearing like a curse. "You cannot hide from me. The bride is mine. The hunt is mine." Phelan stepped forward, placing himself between Isolde and Lyra, his body a shield, his voice ringing out with a power that challenged the storm itself. "She is bound to me, Lyra," he declared. "By ancient law, by choice, by love. You have no claim on her." Lyra laughed, a cold, brittle sound that sent shivers down Isolde's spine. "Love?"
she scoffed.
"You speak of love. You pathetic fool? You know nothing of love. Only of duty, of obligation, of a bond forged in weakness." She raised her hand, and the creatures behind her surged forward, a wave of darkness crashing against the edge of the clearing. The hounds responded, leaping to meet them, their howls and snarls mingling with the clash of steel and the screams of the dying. The battle had begun. Phelan drew his sword, a blade of shimmering silver that seemed to drink in the light, and charged into the fray, his movements fluid and graceful, a deadly dance of death. Isolde, her own dagger drawn, followed close behind, her heart pounding, her senses heightened, fueled by a mixture of fear and a fierce determination to protect the man she loved, the hunt she had sworn to serve. She fought with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed, the skills Phelan had taught her coming instinctively, her movements guided by the ancient magic that now flowed through her veins. She struck, she parried, she dodged, her dagger flashing in the rain, drawing blood, taking lives. But the forces of the unseelie court were overwhelming, their numbers seemingly endless, their hatred a tangible force that pressed down on her, suffocating her, threatening to consume her. She saw Phelan, fighting like a man possessed, his sword a blur of silver, cutting down enemies left and right, but even he seemed to be struggling against the sheer weight of their numbers. And then she saw it. A flicker of movement in the shadows, a figure sneaking up behind Phelan, a dagger raised, aimed for his heart. It was one of the villagers. From Oakhaven. A man she'd known. A man she thought was her friend. "Phelan!" she screamed, her voice lost in the din of battle. But it was too late. The dagger plunged into Phelan's back, a sickening thud that echoed in Isolde's soul. Phelan staggered, his golden eyes widening in shock and pain, his sword falling from his grasp. Betrayal and blood, spilling onto the sacred ground. Chapter 16. The Path of Broken Vows. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The roar of the battle, the clash of steel, the screams of the dying, all faded into a distant hum, replaced by the deafening silence of Isolde's own shattered heart. She saw Phelan fall, his body crumpling to the rain-soaked earth, the silver sword lying useless beside him, the villager, his face twisted in a grotesque mask of hatred and fear, standing over him, the bloody dagger still clutched in his hand. It was Thomas, the baker, a man she had known for years, a man who had always been kind, gentle, a man who had brought her bread and pastries after her husband had died. A man she had trusted. "Thomas, why?" she whispered, her voice choked with disbelief, with grief, with a rage that threatened to consume her whole. He didn't answer, his eyes darting nervously around, as if he were afraid of something or someone. He looked at Lyra, who was watching the scene unfold with a cruel, satisfied smile, and then back at Isolde, his face contorted with a mixture of fear and regret. Lyra glided forward, her skeletal horse picking its way delicately through the carnage, her ice-blue eyes fixed on Isolde. "Foolish mortal," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Did you really think you could defy me? Did you really think he could protect you?" She gestured towards Phelan's fallen form. "The hunt is weakened," she said. "Its leader slain by a commoner. The bond is broken. You are mine now." Isolde felt a surge of fury, a raw, primal rage that obliterated her fear, her grief, her sense of betrayal. She was the bride of the wild hunt, a protector, a warrior, a queen. She would not surrender. She would not be taken. She lunged at Thomas, her dagger flashing in the rain, her movements fueled by an anger that was both terrifying and exhilarating. He tried to defend himself, but he was no match for her, for the power that now surged through her veins, the power of the hunt, the power of her grief-stricken, furious heart. She disarmed him easily, knocking the dagger from his hand, and drove him to his knees. She pressed the point of her own dagger against his throat, her hand trembling with the urge to kill, to avenge Phelan, to punish this betrayal. "Why?" she demanded, her voice raw, her eyes burning with tears. Why did you do this? He cowered before her, his eyes filled with terror. She promised us protection, he stammered. She promised us power. She said the hunt was evil, that it would destroy us all. She said you were a monster. Isolde felt a cold wave of despair wash over her. Lyra's lies, her manipulations, had poisoned the minds of the villagers, turned them against the hunt, against her, against Phelan. She looked at Thomas, at his fear, his regret, his utter helplessness, and she knew she couldn't kill him. Not in cold blood. Not like this. She lowered her dagger, her hand still trembling. Get out of here, she said, her voice hoarse. Get out of my sight. And pray that the hunt forgives you, because I never will. He scrambled to his feet and fled, disappearing into the rain-soaked woods, leaving Isolde alone with Phelan's body, with the carnage of the battle, with the crushing weight of her grief, and the bitter taste of betrayal. Lyra watched all with that same cruel, triumphant smile. Now then, Lyra said, approaching. Let's finish this. Chapter 17. Resurrection and Regret. Now, then, Lyra purred, her voice cutting through the rain and the lingering sounds of battle. Let's finish this. Isolde turned, her body stiff with grief and rage, her dagger held loosely at her side. She looked at Lyra, at her triumphant smirk, at the cold, calculating gleam in her ice-blue eyes, and felt a surge of hatred so intense it almost choked her. But beneath the hatred, beneath the grief, a flicker of something else began to stir, a spark of defiance, a refusal to surrender, a desperate, flickering hope. She had seen Phelan fall, had seen the life drain from his golden eyes, but she wouldn't, believe he was truly gone. The bond, the magic, the love they shared, it couldn't be so easily broken. It had to mean something. Lyra dismounted her skeletal horse, her movements fluid and graceful, like a predator closing in for the kill. It's over, mortal, she said. The hunt is broken. Its leader is dead. You have no power here. Isolde straightened, her back stiffening, her grip tightening on the dagger. The hunt is not dead, she said, her voice trembling but firm. And neither is Phelan. Lyra laughed, a cold, brittle sound that echoed through the clearing. You are delusional, she said. He is gone. And you are nothing without him. She raised her hand, and a bolt of dark energy crackled towards Isolde, a blast of pure malice that threatened to obliterate her. But just as it was about to strike, something extraordinary happened. A wave of power surged from Phelan's body, a golden light that erupted from him, pushing back the darkness, shielding Isolde from the attack. The light intensified, growing brighter, blinding, until it seemed to fill the entire clearing. And then, slowly, miraculously, Phelan began to rise. His eyes, once dull and lifeless, now blazed with a fierce, golden light, even brighter than before. The wound in his back, the mortal wound that should have killed him, was healing, closing, disappearing, as if it had never been. He stood tall, his body radiating power, his presence overwhelming, a resurrected god, a king returned from the brink of death. He looked at Lyra, his gaze filled with a righteous fury that made even her falter. You cannot kill me, Lyra, he said, his voice resonating with an ancient power that shook the very ground beneath their feet. Not while the hunt lives. Not while she lives. He turned to Isolde, his golden eyes softening, filled with a love, a gratitude, a relief that brought tears to her eyes. You saved me, he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. Your love, your strength, your belief in me brought me back. Isolde felt a surge of joy, of relief, of a love so profound it made her heart ache. He was alive. He was back. And he was stronger than ever. Lyra, her face contorted with rage and disbelief, staggered back. Impossible, she screamed. It's impossible. Nothing is impossible, Phelan said, his voice calm, but deadly. When love is your weapon, when hope is your shield, when destiny is your guide. He raised his hand, and the hounds, who had been scattered and demoralized by his fall, rallied to his side, their howls a chorus of renewed loyalty, of fierce determination. The remaining unseelie forces, seeing their leader falter, seeing the resurrected Phelan, began to retreat, their fear overcoming their hatred. Phelan looked at Isolde, a question in his eyes, a plea for forgiveness, a silent acknowledgement of the power they now shared. He was asking, without speaking, what to do. What of Lyra?
What now?
It was Isolde's choice, not just because of the bond, but because the magic, the wild hunt itself, pulsed strongest through her now. Chapter 18. The Unseelie Queen's Wrath. The power surged through Isolde, a tidal wave of ancient magic, of righteous fury, of a love that had conquered death itself. She felt the wild hunt coursing through her veins, a living, breathing entity responding to her will, answering her call. It was a feeling of immense power, of terrifying responsibility, of a connection to Phelan, to the hunt, to the very heart of the wildwood, that was stronger, deeper, more profound than anything she had ever imagined. She looked at Lyra, at her fear, her rage, her desperate, crumbling defiance, and for a moment, she felt a flicker of pity. Pity for a creature so consumed by hatred, by ambition, by a lust for power that she had lost all sense of compassion, of empathy, of the very essence of what it meant to be alive. But pity quickly gave way to resolve. Lyra had threatened everything Isolde held dear. She had manipulated, she had betrayed, she had tried to destroy the hunt, to kill Phelan, to steal Isolde's very soul. She had to be stopped. Isolde stepped forward, her voice ringing out with a power that surprised even her, a power that echoed the ancient authority of the wild hunt itself. Lyra, she said, your reign of terror is over. Your ambition has blinded you. Your hatred has consumed you. Your power is waning. Lyra snarled, her ice-blue eyes burning with a furious, desperate light. You dare to speak to me like that, mortal? She screamed. You, a mere vessel for the hunt's power, a pawn in a game you do not understand? She raised her hands, and the remaining unseelie forces, though diminished and demoralized, rallied to her side, their fear of Phelan outweighed by their fear of their own queen. A swirling vortex of dark energy began to gather around Lyra, a manifestation of her rage, her desperation, her last-ditch attempt to seize victory from the jaws of defeat. I am the Unseelie Queen, she shrieked. I am mistress of the shadows, ruler of the night, heir to the ancient power. I will not be defeated by a mortal and her mongrel king. The vortex intensified, growing larger, more menacing, threatening to engulf the entire clearing, to consume everything in its path. The hounds, though loyal and brave, cowered before its power, their howls turning into whimpers, their golden eyes filled with fear. Phelan stepped forward, his sword raised, ready to defend Isolde, to protect the hunt, to face Lyra's wrath, even if it meant his own destruction. But Isolde stopped him, placing a hand on his arm, her touch conveying a strength, a confidence, a certainty that surprised even him. This is my fight, Phelan, she said, her voice calm but resolute. The hunt flows through me now. I am its voice. I am its power. I am its queen. She stepped forward, facing Lyra, facing the swirling vortex of dark energy, her eyes shining with a golden light that mirrored Phelan's, a light that was even brighter, even more powerful than his own. She raised her hands, and the power of the wild hunt surged through her, a wave of pure, untainted energy that met Lyra's darkness head-on. The two forces collided, a clash of light and shadow, of life and death, of love and hate, a battle for the very soul of the wildwood. You have no power here, Lyra, Isolde declared, her voice resonating with the authority of the ancient hunt, with the strength of her love for Phelan, with the power of her own awakened spirit. This is the realm of the wild hunt, and I am its bride. The golden light emanating from Isolde intensified, pushing back the darkness, consuming the vortex, overwhelming Lyra's power. Lyra screamed, a sound of pure agony, of utter defeat, as the light enveloped her, stripping her of her power, her magic, her very essence. Chapter 19. A Love Forged in Chaos. Lyra's scream echoed through the clearing, a piercing wail of anguish and defeat that gradually faded into silence. The swirling vortex of dark energy dissipated, the remnants of the unseelie forces scattered like shadows before the dawn. The rain began to subside, the wind calmed, and the first rays of sunlight pierced through the clouds, illuminating the scene of carnage and victory. Isolde stood, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her spirit soaring, her heart filled with a mixture of triumph and relief. The power of the wild hunt still coursed through her veins, but it was no longer a raging torrent, but a gentle, steady flow, a source of strength, of peace, of a profound connection to the world around her. She looked at Phelan, who was watching her with a mixture of awe, admiration, and a love that shone brighter than the emerging sun. He stepped towards her, his golden eyes filled with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "You did it, Isolde," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You saved us. You saved the hunt. You saved me." He reached out and gently cupped her face, his touch sending a shiver of warmth through her, a warmth that chased away the lingering chill of Lyra's darkness. I didn't do it alone," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It was us. Our love, our bond, the power of the hunt, it all worked together." He smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face and made him seem almost human, despite the ancient power that still radiated from him. "You are the heart of the hunt now, Isolde," he said. "The soul. The queen." He leaned down and kissed her, a gentle, tender kiss that spoke of gratitude, of admiration, of a love that had been forged in chaos, tested by betrayal, and strengthened by sacrifice. It was a kiss that sealed their bond, not just as leader and bride of the wild hunt, but as two souls intertwined, two hearts united, two beings destined to be together for eternity. As they broke the kiss, Isolde became aware of the silence that had fallen over the clearing. The hounds, no longer cowering, were gathered around them, their golden eyes filled with a renewed loyalty, a respect that bordered on reverence. They nudged her gently, licking her hands, whimpering softly, as if acknowledging her as their new mistress, their protector, their queen. The remaining villagers of Oakhaven, those who had not sided with Lyra, those who had hidden in fear during the battle, began to emerge from the woods, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes filled with a mixture of awe and shame. They approached Isolde and Phelan hesitantly, their heads bowed, their voices trembling. "Forgive us," one of them said, an old woman who had been Isolde's neighbor for years. "We were deceived. We were afraid. We didn't know." Isolde looked at them, at their fear, their regret, their plea for forgiveness, and she felt a surge of compassion. They had been manipulated, lied to, used as pawns in Lyra's game. They were not evil, just misguided. "There is nothing to forgive," she said, her voice calm, but firm. "Lyra's darkness has been banished. The hunt is strong. The balance has been restored. We must now work together to rebuild, to heal, to create a future where such a thing can never happen again." She turned to Phelan, her eyes seeking his approval, his support. He nodded, his golden eyes filled with pride and love. "We will rebuild," he said, his voice resonating with authority. "Together. The hunt and the village, united, stronger than ever before." He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, and together, they turned to face the rising sun, the dawn of a new era, an era of peace, of healing, of a love that had conquered all, a love that would last for eternity. A shared future, earned. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts. The rising sun painted the sky in hues of gold and rose, casting a warm, healing light over the ravaged clearing, a symbol of hope, of renewal, of a new beginning. The air, washed clean by the rain, was filled with a scent of damp earth, of pine, and a faint, lingering trace of the magic that had been unleashed, a reminder of the battle that had been fought, the victory that had been won. Isolde, standing hand in hand with Phelan, felt a sense of peace, of completion, of a profound connection to the man she loved, to the hunt she now led, to the land she had sworn to protect. The power of the wild hunt flowed through her, not as a raging torrent, but as a steady, gentle stream, a source of strength, of wisdom, of a deep, abiding connection to the natural world. But there was one final thread to be woven, one last loose end to be tied. A final confrontation, not of weapons and magic, but of hearts and minds. A confrontation that would determine the future of Oakhaven, the future of the relationship between the hunt and the mortal world. The villagers, still huddled together, watched Isolde and Phelan with a mixture of fear and hope. They had witnessed the battle, seen the power of the hunt unleashed, seen their friends and neighbors turned into monsters by Lyra's dark magic. They had also seen Isolde, their former neighbor, the widow they had pitted, rise to become a queen, a warrior, a savior. Isolde stepped forward, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the clearing. "People of Oakhaven," she said, "we have all been through a terrible ordeal. We have been deceived, manipulated, divided by fear and lies. But the darkness has been banished. The balance has been restored. Now is the time for healing, for forgiveness, for understanding." She looked at them, her eyes filled with compassion, but also with a firm resolve. "The wild hunt is not your enemy," she said. "We are protectors of this land, guardians of the balance between the mortal world and the other world. We are not monsters, but beings of nature, bound to this land, just as you are." She paused, letting her words sink in, letting them feel the truth of her words, the sincerity of her intentions. "I know many of you sided with Lyra," she continued. "You were afraid. You were misled. You believed her lies. I do not blame you for that. But I ask you now to choose a different path, to choose trust over fear, understanding over prejudice, cooperation over conflict." She extended her hand towards them, a gesture of peace, of reconciliation, of a new beginning. "Let us work together," she said. "Let us rebuild our village, strengthen our bonds, and create a future where humans and the hunt can coexist in harmony, where the ancient magic is respected, not feared, where the balance of nature is preserved, not destroyed." There was a long silence, a moment of tension, of uncertainty. Then, slowly, hesitantly, the villagers began to step forward one by one, their faces filled with a mixture of shame, regret, and hope. The old woman who had been Isolde's neighbor, the one who had pleaded for forgiveness, was the first to reach her. She took Isolde's hand, her eyes filled with tears. "We were wrong," she said, her voice trembling.
"So wrong."
"Forgive us, Isolde. Forgive us, Queen of the Hunt." Isolde smiled, a gentle, forgiving smile that eased the tension, that melted away the lingering fear. "There is nothing to forgive," she said. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is that we learn from them, that we strive to do better, that we choose love over hate, understanding over ignorance." One by one, the villagers came forward, pledging their loyalty, their support, their commitment to building a new, stronger, more harmonious relationship with the hunt. Phelan, standing beside Isolde, watched the scene unfold with a quiet pride, a deep satisfaction, a love for his bride that shone brighter than the morning sun. He knew that this was just the beginning, that there would be challenges ahead, that the scars of the past would take time to heal. But he also knew that with Isolde by his side, with the power of the hunt flowing through them, with the love they shared binding them together, they could overcome any obstacle, face any challenge, create a future worthy of the sacrifices that had been made. He leaned down and kissed her, a long, slow, passionate kiss that sealed their commitment, not just to each other, but to the future they would build together, a future of peace, of harmony, of a love that would last for eternity. The final confrontation was over, and love, ultimately, had triumphed. Their shared future, a testament to resilience, stretched before them, bathed in the golden light. Epilogue. Years turned into decades, and decades into centuries. The memory of the battle with Lyra and the Unseelie court faded into legend, a tale told around firesides on cold winter nights, a reminder of the power of the wild hunt, the dangers of the otherworld, and the enduring strength of love and loyalty. Oakhaven flourished, rebuilt and revitalized, a testament to the harmonious coexistence of humans and the hunt. The villagers, once fearful and suspicious, now embraced their connection to the ancient magic, respecting the wildwood, honoring the traditions, celebrating the bond between the mortal and the mystical. Isolde and Phelan, their love undimmed by the passage of time, ruled the hunt with wisdom and compassion, guiding their people, protecting the land, ensuring the balance between the worlds. The mark of the hunt, once a symbol of obligation, had become a symbol of their enduring love, a reminder of the day they had faced death and emerged victorious, united by a bond that transcended mortality. Isolde, though eternally youthful in appearance, thanks to the magic of the hunt, retained the wisdom, the compassion, the quiet strength that had drawn Phelan to her in the first place. She became a legend in her own right, known as Isolde the Wise, Isolde the Brave, Isolde the Queen of Hearts, a ruler who is both feared and revered, a protector who is both fierce and gentle, a lover who is both passionate and tender. Phelan, his ancient sorrow tempered by his love for Isolde, his burden lightened by her unwavering support, became a more compassionate, more understanding leader, a king who ruled not with fear, but with love, a warrior who fought not for conquest, but for peace. They often walked together in the wildwood, hand in hand, their steps echoing the paths of their ancestors, their love a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring power of connection, a symbol of the eternal dance between the mortal and the magical. They would visit the clearing where the great oak stood, the place where they had first met, where Isolde made her choice to embrace the hunt. And sometimes, on quiet nights, when the moon was full and the wind whispered through the leaves, Isolde would hear the faint, distant baying of the hounds, a sound that no longer filled her with fear, but with a sense of belonging, of peace, of a love that would last for eternity. A reminder that she was home, truly home, in the arms of her beloved, in the heart of the wildwood, in the embrace of the wild hunt. And as she embraced it, she knew her choice had always been right, that this life, this magic, this love, it was all worth it. Everything, for the magic in his golden eyes and the promise of forever.